Well, hello and good afternoon once again, and welcome to this month's CMD webinar. I'm Tim Fergusson and I work in the ministries team at the Baptist Union. And whether this is your first CMD webinar or whether you are a seasoned participant, I'm glad you've joined me this afternoon. And welcome to you also if you're watching this as a recording a bit later on. Since we started these CMD webinars a year ago now, I've tried to concentrate on the tools and means that help us in our continuing ministerial development. So we've looked at pastoral supervision, at ministers' meetings, at learning communities, at how we choose what to read, at Baptist theological journals. And we've also looked at some of the support networks out there, such as the Order of Baptist Ministry and Fresh Streams. And last month, we looked at how we can benefit from spiritual direction. And I recommend all of those webinars to you. They're all available, by the way, if you want to find recordings of them on the Baptists Together website CMD page. But all of these opportunities for CMD do remain just that, opportunities, unless we intentionally plan to introduce some of them into our pattern of ministry. So at home, I've got some pine furniture, 2 wardrobes, 2 chests of drawers, and I bought these when I was first married 30 years ago. And the pine, we're told in the instructions, it needs an occasional polish with wax to keep it in its best condition. So this I did once or twice for the first few years, but it has been my intention to polish the furniture again for probably the last quarter of a century. And I have to say that it's now looking tired, and the handles especially are down to the bare wood. And I don't know about you, but similarly, I find it easy to aspire to my own development in a general sense, but not so easy to get on and turn those aspirations into reality. So today's webinar is about how we do some of that by using an annual CMD audit. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So for 10 minutes, please just let me explain what an annual audit is about, and then I'm going to bring some other people in to comment on their experience of running an audit. So the CMD framework asks for all of us as ministers to undergo a CMD audit once a year and in the autumn. And I want to make it clear that this is different to any review of your ministry. So CMD also asks us to review our work as ministers once every 3 years. And there's a tool to help us with that called a 360-degree review. And the details about how you carry out a review, they're in the CMD handbook. And there's a webinar about that as well. But an annual CMD audit is different to a ministry review. So a CMD audit is not concerned with, how we're developing mission in our community, or whether we're getting on with our deacons or whatever it may be. A CMD audit is only concerned with how we practice the 5 CMD habits, which together foster our well-being and our capability as ministers. So it audits just our engagement with ongoing development. And we do this in partnership with a colleague, and we call those colleagues CMD peers. So we're free to choose any fellow minister to help us with this. Now, ideally, that will be another Baptist minister, but some of you may already have mentors or supervisors who you can who you can go to for an audit, and they can take that role for you. But in most cases, I expect that audits will be mutual. 2 ministers get together for a few hours once a year and audit each other's CMD. It might even be possible to do this as a small accountability group of 3 or 4 ministers. But the point is this: we try to choose someone we trust and feel safe with, but who is still prepared to ask us the uncomfortable questions. So, pick someone who's going to be challenging, but who also is going to affirm you. And if you're thinking, well, I really don't know who I could go to, then do have a word with your regional minister, and they may be able to help suggest someone for you. So once we've identified our CMD peer, then we make a date to meet with them. And if you haven't yet done so for this year, then now is the time to do this, because we would like the audits to be completed by the end of November. Now, if you go to the CMD handbook and look at Appendix 6, you will find there a form that guides you through your CMD audit meeting. And it's not a complex form, it's very straightforward. And it is split into two parts. So the first looks back over the last 12 months, and the second looks forward to the next 12. So section 1 asks us to comment on how we have practiced the 5 CMD habits over the last year. I'm kind of hoping you're familiar with these already. They are learning, attentiveness, accountability, connection, and review. So firstly, we jot down what and how we have been learning in the last year. And I'm also hoping by now we've understood that learning, it's not just about books or academic study, though it may be about both of those. And, those of you who love reading will be able to list all the books that you've read recently, I'm sure. And that's great. But the form asks us to think a little bit more broadly than that. It's not just what we've read, it's whether we have been on any training or attended any webinars or visited another setting to see how they do ministry. So, we're asking, what courses, what books, what blogs, what TV programs, what podcasts, even maybe what friendships have enabled us to learn in the last year. And clearly, it's going to help if we are honest. The idea here is not to impress our colleague. The idea is to be frank about where we're at, because that honesty will help us with the second half of the audit when we think about what gaps we need to fill. So as for learning, so with the other habits, next we comment on our habit of attentiveness. What are the ways in which we sustain our devotional life and keep our spirituality fresh? How do we protect time off for ourselves, our family, for exercise, for friendships? How do we maintain our personal well-being? And again, honesty is key. If our own answer to these questions make us feel uncomfortable, then we're probably onto something, and maybe some corrective actions are required. We can then comment on how we practice accountability. Each of us is encouraged to have someone outside our immediate setting to whom we can go regularly, just to share some of what's happening within our ministry and our lives. So, who has been your sounding board, your listening ear, your comforter, your voice of wisdom? If you have a mentor or a pastoral supervisor or a spiritual director, the answer to this section might be a single line that explains that relationship. But you may have a kind of a smorgasbord of people who hold you accountable, and you can list these in order then to reflect upon how that's working. Then we outline how we practice connection, in other words, how we express fellowship with and support for others in Baptist ministry. And this is because, you see, we're supposed to be in covenant relationship with each other, both receiving from and giving to fellow ministers and local clusters and associations and the union. And for some of us, our list of ways we connect will be extensive. But others of us do work in quite isolated settings, in chaplaincies or pioneer situations. And so this question might prove quite challenging to answer. Then the fifth habit is review, and this requires a slightly different response. And if you look at the audit form, it looks for a simple yes/no answer. Have we undertaken a ministry review in the last year? And if not, when is the next one due? And the idea here is just to keep in mind at each audit every year, when might it be time to submit our ministry to review once more? So I kind of hope it will be fairly obvious that we'll save a lot of time and a lot of head scratching in our audit meeting if we complete this first section of the form before we meet with our CMD peer. Because all the first section does is to help capture the reality of our CMD to date. And in Appendix 6 of the handbook, you can find not only the form, but you can also find a kind of a table or a pro forma that, if you want, you can use throughout the year just to jot down your CMD activity as you go along. Now, if you've got an organised mind, this will be great, and you can fill out one of these, and then the preparation for your CMD audit, it will be done already. It will be done automatically. I realise that some of us will never get around to being quite as organised as that, and you may need to sit down for a couple of hours before your meeting to think, what is it I've done in the last year? that has been an expression of these 5 habits. So when we meet with our CMD peer for our audit, we first talk through the ways we have already been practicing CMD over the last year. But in the second half of the meeting, we start to look forward to the next 12 months. Now, the questions are the same, and they go through each of the CMD habits in turn. But, this is where the real benefit of CMD lies, because this is where we name some of those, furniture polishing good intentions, and we write them down. So when it comes to learning, well, what is it we really need to learn in this next year? What's the focus going to be, and how are we going to pursue it? Do we need to speak perhaps to a college tutor to get some ideas of books to read? Do we need to ask for suggestions of resources via one of the Facebook groups? Do we need to sign up for a course? And if so, well, which and when and who's going to pay? I think this is when we get into the detail so that we have the best chance of achieving the learning that we want. And again, for the second section, just as for the first section, as for learning, so with the other habits, what practices or disciplines should we adopt to sharpen our attentiveness to God, to others, to our own well-being? Are our accountability relationships really helping us? Or do we need to seek perhaps a spiritual director or a pastoral supervisor perhaps? How can we express that covenant relationship of connection between us? Is there a further or a new way we might connect with and support the wider Baptist family? And if a ministry review is due, well, who would be best to carry out that review? So in section 2, we talk through with our CMD peer our aspirations and maybe the obstacles to those aspirations. And maybe we'll make some commitments about what we're going to do or the steps that we're going to take to enable our ongoing development in the next season. Now, of course, we can write on our CMD audit form any number of things that we determine to do and then file it away and not look at it again for a year, which is not great. Each of us will have different ways of making sure that we turn plans into actions. So you might want to share the main points from your audit with a mentor or a supervisor if you have one, and give them permission to ask about your progress. You might want to arrange to talk again with your CMD peer a few months in, maybe once or twice during the year, just to see how you're getting on. Or you might simply want to put aside a morning or an afternoon immediately after your audit to get on and to put into place anything that can be immediately actioned, and to sign up for that training course, to order that book, whatever else it may be. There is, however, one follow-up task we would like everyone to do. We in the ministries team, we don't want to see your annual audit forms. Please don't send them to us. I have not got time to read 1,400 audit forms, and they are in any case confidential to you and your CMD peer. What we in the ministries team do want to know is simply that you have met. And we would like to know how many ministers are engaging with these CMD audits. So when you've met, please will you just drop me an email that tells me your name, your church or ministry setting so I can find you on the database, the date that you held a CMD audit, and if you held a ministry review in the last year, the date of that also. And to make that a little bit easier, in the next CMD news email I send out, there'll be a sort of a pro forma email. You should be able to just click on it, fill in the boxes when you finished your audit at some point, and then send that back to me. And well, to be honest, that is really it. That is what a CMD audit is. I said it isn't rocket science. It's very top level. And I guess it will be as useful to us as we determine to make it. But I want to so encourage you not to see a CMD audit as a duty or as a task to tick off the list, but as a chance to journey with and support a colleague. If we have a heart for being ministers of Jesus and a heart for our fellow ministers, then I think an audit should be a gift to us. It's an opportunity to explore and protect our capability and our well-being so that we might serve with greater freshness and with greater resilience. So that's me done for the moment. Now, do add any comments and questions you've got in the chat box, and we'll try and get around to those as we go. I've got, as you can see, there are already quite a number already present. Most of them are people just saying hi, but if you've got any questions, do put them in the chat box. That would be great. But what I'm going to do now is to introduce 3 people who have already completed a CMD audit to get their views on how that went. So a real welcome to Margaret Gibbs, and to Ruth Moriarty, and to Trevor Neill. Let's just bring this all up equally there on the screen and get rid of that. There we go, clicking away here. So welcome, Margaret, Ruth, and Trevor. Great to have you with us. Now, I'm going to start off by asking, I guess it'd just be great to know, first of all, just the briefest thing about each of you. So I wonder whether you could each tell me, how long you've been a minister for and what your current ministry role is. So let's go Margaret, Ruth, and Trevor in that order.
I wasn't expecting a numbers question. I'm Minister of Perry Rice Baptist Church in South London, which is a multi-ethnic church, mainly Caribbean. I've been here for 8 years, and prior to that, I served with BMS for some years.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ruth, and I am the Minister of Christchurch, New Southgate and Friar Barnet, which is a Baptist ULC LEP. I've been here for 4 years, and I've been in ministry 15.
Yeah, I'm Trevor. I'm team leader at Selsdon Baptist Church in South Croydon. I've been here for 3 years, and prior to that had 8 years in South Birmingham. So yeah, that's 11 in total. Yeah.
Okay. Now, so you very kindly have been, well, not very kindly, without prompting, have been early adopters of the CMD audit. So when did you first do your first CMD audit? When was that?
Well, Ruth and I are partners in this, and I think we're both planners and quite keen to get on with things in a way. So we decided to opt in quite early, and so we did our first review last year when I think it was still optional, but we just decided to get on with it last November.
Okay. Yeah. And well, I can say for us, so Trevor is my CMD peer, I'm his. So again, we've been partners in this, and having devised a CMD framework, I thought I really ought to get on and do an audit myself fairly early. So again, I think it was last November, Trevor, that we also sat down and went through the process. But of much more interest, a bit of a risk me asking Trevor this, but certainly for Margaret and Ruth, why did you choose each other? So you could choose any minister. So how did you go about that process of thinking, well, who's going to be best to help me in this?
Well, Margaret and I already knew each other, so we're part of a cell group for the Order of Baptist Ministry. So we meet monthly, and part of that process is that we undertake a cell review every month, and we ask each other accountability questions as a group. So accountability is kind of part of our rhythm for ministry, and this really fitted in well with that. And so Margaret said, "Hey Ruth, come on, let's do this together." And it just made a lot of sense for us because we already knew each other enough that we could be accountable to each other and that we could ask each other questions effectively.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Trevor, I can't remember whether I strong-armed you or how we came about this.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it felt quite natural, didn't it? In some ways, I mean, we were, although we're in different locations now, we were in neighbouring churches, I think, for about 6 years. So we worked closely with each other and became good friends in that time, didn't we? And we were in a regular pattern of meeting once a month or once every 6 weeks, doing quiet days together a couple of times a year. So it felt natural. And there's something, isn't there, I think, about having a bit of history with each other as well, and just knowing what we've been through. If this issue is impacting me, particularly at the minute, and that, well, 5 years ago, I went through X, Y, or Z, and that's why it might be triggering stuff or exciting me because maybe something at long last hoped for is coming to fruition. I think a sense of history with someone and just feeling safe and secure in a context of friendship helps massively.
Yeah. So in both our cases, so we've actually lent on some existing relationships, and I guess again this idea of being able to trust the person that you are meeting with. that this is a safe space to be, but one in which hopefully there will be a bit of challenge involved as well. So it's not just a meeting of people who are going to collude to avoid any actions. It's actually a desire to see each other grow. And because we had history together, Margaret, Ruth is saying, I think that's enhanced the experience. So I'm hoping that those of you watching will be able to think, well, who is that person for you? And then be able to ask them and maybe do something mutual. I'm just going to bring in at this point a question that's related to this, because so there's a question here coming on the chat. Have I understood you right, Tim, that your peer, your CMD peer for the review can be your pastoral supervisor if they're a Baptist minister? So, Andrew, thank you for asking that. So generally, we're suggesting that your CMD peer should be a Baptist minister. That would be helpful, I think, if it was, because they understand your context and because this is about walking together. I think, as with the whole CMD framework, we don't want to be overly prescriptive. And so if there's just a relationship that you have, say, with a pastoral supervisor, and you just know that relationship is going to deliver what you need in a CMD audit, and they're going to be able to help you, and you can agree to spend the time doing that, then I would say by all means use that relationship to hold the audit. And whether that will fall in within their brief will be a matter of discussion between you and a pastoral supervisor. So in general, pick another Baptist minister if you can. But if you know there's someone out there who is going to do this job really well for you, then we're not being prescriptive, and indeed we're not checking up on who it is that you hold your audit with anyway. So there's a little bit of a free for all, but we wanted to give some guidelines into that. So Margaret and Ruth, just say a little bit more about the order of Baptist ministry. We've already looked at it in a previous webinar, but you say there's some accountability that is already part of their pattern. How did that help you when you came to do the CMD audit?
Well, one of the reasons I like the OBM, the Order for Baptist Ministry, is the accountability part of it and the actual review questions. Well, I really like them because they're based on the vows you take when you're ordained into Baptist ministry. So they're very direct and keeping you on point. And if you have a group of folks that you are learning to relate to trust, and do think Baptist ministers, only we really get what it means to be a Baptist minister in some ways. It's a bit of a unique blessing, burden. So these promises are helpful, but if you're interested, simply go on the website, the Order for Baptist Ministry, OBM. You'll find a lot more information there. Yeah. But it means Ruth and I were in this pattern, actually, but also in a group setting, not just as individuals.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm looking for accountability that way.
It sort of sharpens the sense of spirituality. So it's not just reading the Bible, not just praying together, although they're wonderful things. It's being a kind of critical friend to each other. And that's what I think this extends the CMD audit into. Yeah,
critical friend is a great phrase. I don't think it appears in the CMD handbook. I guess it could do. That's a very useful phrase to use. So I was thinking of a question here from Brian. He said, tell me more about the Order of Baptist Ministers. Brian, hopefully that gives you just a little bit of an indication. But again, do go to their website, or if you look at the CMD page on the Baptists Together website, there is a link to a webinar, which is all about that, with Sarah Crane and Colin Norris. And they can tell you much more about it if you're interested. So how did you prepare for your audit, or did you just turn up and get the forms out and think, oh my goodness me, what do we need to do? Did you prepare for it in any way? Let's go. I'll ask Trevor that first of all. Trevor, what did you do for hours?
Yes, there was I spent an hour or two, I think, looking through the form. I mean, we sent stuff, I think, recall in advance, and I found that very helpful. So there is something about, I think, planning for any meeting or conversation in an intentional way matters, and there's definitely what I think for me, a period of almost listening to my soul, trying to sort of sense what do I really need to talk about, and if we're going to get the most out of this, it's not just a list of headings, isn't it? It's maybe which of these categories is a summons to what's exciting me or disquieting me, and how are we going to make the most of this time? So it was more than listing off here are the books I've read or here are the people I've seen. I think some kind of deeper looking inside ourselves really helps. Yeah,
I'm with that. So I mean, I did the same. I was writing down before our meeting what I had done, and in one sense that was a list to begin with. But I think you're right. You're trying to discern in this. Well, some of this, I can list a number of books I've read, and some of them have been just books I've read, and some of them have been deeply impactful on my ministry. And I guess it's some of that you want to bring to the meeting as well, not just what you have done, but how it's impacted you, not least because the other person you're working with may gain from what your insights are, or your ideas or your suggestions. What has worked for you might be a suggestion they can adopt for themselves. Margaret and Ruth, what about your preparation?
Well, coming from a practical point of view, simply putting dates in the diary. I think Ruth and I have a fairly similar approach to planning things like this, and that is helpful. Whereas on the other hand, we're not similar in our views on everything and want to be sure that you've got someone who can challenge you or bring new ideas. But I think just saying, not just one date in the diary, but this date for the audit and then the next date for a review or whatever, looking ahead was really helpful. And also it just reminds you, get on with it if it's in the diary. And make sure you don't miss the opportunity and do it all at the last minute.
And I did, in terms of preparation, I've always done a sort of diary flick back ahead of, on my pattern of retreat, for example. I'd always look back through my diary since my last retreat, what's been happening. And that might be a list of things, but it might also be something, a sense of spirit's leading me in. And so then I did that for the whole year prior to the November, which obviously was mostly lockdown. So it was a very special time to think through. And I think that really helped me, because you can often in ministry, you can think, I've done nothing today, or I've achieved 0 in the last month. And actually, when you go back, you realise I have preached X sermons, I've done this, I've seen this happen, I've brought this to birth in my church. And so it was helpful just to literally just swipe back over through your diary and look what's happened, see what God has been doing, and bring that to bear in the conversation. And I think Margaret and I think we actually had a pre-planning meeting. So we're proper kind of geeky when it comes to diaries. So the handbook's quite large, which is obviously great because there's lots of information in there. But we were a little bit unsure of how to use it. So we set aside some time just to break it down and to work out what we had to do. And then we met to do it with each other. So that's what we did.
Okay, that's really helpful. I mean, I wrote the handbook, so I'm familiar with this, of course, and sometimes even I forget what's in it, and I have to go back and check. So yes, I quite like the idea that if you're new to CMD in terms of what it involves, perhaps with a peer, I love that idea that there might be just an initial conversation just to say, well, ignoring the audit for a moment, what's the full breadth of this, and have we grasped what it is, and have we got any questions about it? And if you do have questions, of course, which you can't answer within your peer partnership, then do email me and I'll try and answer those. Just a question come in here about preparation from Roger Waters. Thank you for this. Would you recommend getting a 360 review done before your CMD audit? Well, yes, would be the answer. So I have been encouraging that over the last few months. You might want to think in the run-up to an audit whether the output from a 360-degree review would be helpful for your development. So, for example, if your review, if all your reviewers consistently raise a particular issue where they think you need to develop, because that's one of the questions in the 360-degree review, then that's something you can take into your audit meeting and discuss with your peer, how might I do this, and what would be a way through. So not essential, and clearly we're suggesting the ministry review is only once every 3 years, whereas a CMD audit is every single year. So you won't be doing it every time. But if you've got a 360 review, degree review due, then you might as well do it in the run-up before an audit. That might be quite helpful. So, Margaret and Ruth, again, I just want to pick up on this. If you looked at the handbook beforehand, was it quite overwhelming when you looked at it? As you tried to get your head around the whole thing?
I think perhaps the thought of it was more another thing to do on the list. But actually, when we set aside time, it was fine. And I think the benefit of Zoom and technology is that we can say, right, we will spend 40 minutes we're going to dedicate this 40 minutes to working out what it is and doing it together. And then it just got done, and it was just a lot easier.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Trevor, again, thinking back to ours, I think we ran through the form in a fairly prescriptive fashion, I think. I don't know, did we add questions, or I can remember one that you asked me, which was particularly perceptive, which we'll come to in a minute, but were we fairly ordered in it? I think we were.
I think we were, yes. I mean, it's worth saying we actually spent a day doing this. I mean, we're in a pattern of quiet days, and we came together. We spent quite a long time looking through the questions, and then we went our separate ways. We did this on Zoom because this was November, wasn't it, when we were facing lots of restrictions. So I think we spent probably 2.5 hours talking things over, then spent sort of the same period of time going off for a walk, praying stuff over, and then sort of regathered in the afternoon. And I mean, we may not all feel we have the luxury of a whole day to do this, but actually, I'm not sure it is a luxury. I think it's a necessity. And if it's only one day a year, or even a couple of days a year, I just think conversations like this really need to breathe. So yeah, we went through it quite methodically, but took a long time to do it. Was my recollection. Yeah.
Margaret, was it again? Did you add questions to what you were doing, or change the questions?
No, I don't think we particularly did with the audit, did we, Ruth? And as Ruth has said, we had a preparation meeting. I needed to go off with the file and just try and read the thing and get my head around it in a quiet space, and then found that it was fairly straightforward. But actually, it was doing the audit together which enabled me to understand what it was all about. And we've only done the one. Yeah. So that in itself was a learning experience. By the time we'd done it, yes, it was helpful. It was straightforward, but we just went at it as it was, I think, the first time, didn't we, Ruth? It'd be interesting to see how it develops from there, because the first one is always a bit different. You've not got a history to that or a flow at that point, but I'm sure it'll move forward from there.
Yeah, okay. And so I guess you can go through the form as it's written, but maybe sometimes you're looking, aren't we, for those moments where the Spirit surprises us or reveals something to us rather than just going through the motions of it. I wonder whether you can think whether there was anything that surprised you in the conversations that you then had. So for me, I'll say what it was for me, which is what I referenced a minute ago. Trevor, you asked me a question which is not on the form necessarily, but was, what are you developing towards? Now, I find that quite a provocative question for me, because I can talk about my general development in terms of, I'm making sure that I'm ministering well and I'm keeping fresh with reading and learning and theology. But actually, is there a sense that there is something God is calling me to, which I need to actually very actively work towards? And I found that a very helpful question. What are you developing towards? So that surprised me, and it was very helpful in that meeting. But the three of you, I don't know whether, again, things surprised you at all in what we looked at.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that just comes to mind for me, Tim, is that I think it's quite easy, isn't it, to go into maybe an exercise like this and you think, well, I'm looking at 5 categories and here are the things that I'm pretty confident I'm okay on or doing well on, and here are the things where I know that there are real needs. But maybe be willing to sort of lovingly question each other on the strengths as well. So learning, I mean, I read lots and I'm picking up books all the time and sort of reading through them quite quickly. And I think one of the things you sort of just prodded me on a little bit was to think, well, in a sense, to what end? And so one of the things I came out with was to read more intentionally or deliberately and maybe in a more sort of strategically planned way. So maybe don't rush over the areas where we think we're okay, or even let each other get away with that. Maybe just lovingly challenging each other in each area. That helped me. Yeah
Ruth?
I think the thing that surprised me was when I listed under 4 connections. So how am I connected to the BU and other ministers? And a worryingly long list started to appear. And I realised that my focus for this year is my church, but also to finish a PhD. And I thought I just need to cut some of these things, which I felt really bad about doing, but actually it's the right thing for me to do. So it gave me a bit of confidence, but it also just held me to account just writing it down in a list. Actually, I was overcommitted in some areas, and Margaret very helpfully suggested maybe a trim.
That's helpful. So this is not just about adding to your burden of things that you're not doing that you should do. It may well reveal actually there are things that you are doing which need to be reduced or need to be perhaps more focused. Yeah. Margaret, what about yourself?
I'm in a regular process of review with the church where I serve already that's been going on for some years. And some of the things being listed are the same things, but it did strike me that this process is more personal to me. Whereas the church review, you could read between the lines and say, well, really, this is about them and what they want and in the way they see ministry. So that was good, perhaps, knowing that it's in a sense confidential from the church and therefore stands alongside stuff I'm doing with them. That was perhaps good. The other thing I would say, really, we've started this in lockdown. It's this has happened in a really unique time. So some of the answers you might have expected to be making in normal time, if there is such a thing, would have been different. And that this must be a good thing. It will grow from there, and it will lead from there. But in some ways, yes, because it's been locked down, some of the connections outside the church do feel stronger at the moment because we've had the means to meet each other in other kinds of groups on Zoom or in other ways more than we would normally do in the midst of ministry, not in a crisis. So I'm sure it will change as the years go by a little bit.
Yeah. I think lockdown has affected so much. I mean, I anticipate as well that as people think about what they've learned in the last year, there will be hardly any of us who will not be putting something down about digital skills and all sorts of new tools that we've been forced to learn, really, and benefited from, hopefully. Okay, so you go through the form, you talk about these areas. What did you do with the output of this? So did you literally fill in the form and write it all in, or was it just a discussion and you didn't necessarily fill it in? And if you did fill it in, what did you do with it afterwards? So who would like to go first?
Predictably, mine's all in a file.
Well, I think we're getting the impression that you're an organised mind, Margaret.
I can't help it, really can't help it. But yes, did use the form as a basis for discussion and made some further notes and have filed it away so that it's easy to refer to. And Ruth and I had put in a date. We felt that midterm review would be needed, not just to leave it. So we did put a date and we've done a midterm review at around 6 months, I think it was, Ruth.
That's right.
We're planning the next stages in the process, and that's helpful for me because I know it's all together. The information I need is all together. I know where it is, and I hope it's not just a form filling exercise in that respect, but it's it's there for the next step.
Okay. Now, Trevor, I think we said we would do a 6-month review. And although we've met several times since our CMD audit, I'm not sure we ever got the form out again and had a look at it and talked about what we said we would do. Or rather, when I looked at mine 2 days ago in preparation for this, I thought, oh dear, I haven't looked at this for a while. So I'm just confessing that here.
We did exchange them, and we've met. But I have to say, I have found, I mean, from my perspective, there are some things we've returned to which has been useful. So I would fess up and say that getting a pastoral supervisor was something that we put down on this form. You've been talking to me about it for a while, Tim, and encouraging me. CMD then made me kind of commit to it and sort of covenant with each other that I would go off and do that. And I still didn't. It took me quite a while, but I've now met with someone twice. We have our 3rd meeting next week with that supervisor, and it has just been wonderful. And I find myself thinking, I really should have done this a long time ago. So, this is just holding each other to account and maybe not to let each other off the hook. I know that's been one of the most helpful things I think you've given to me through this process. Definitely.
Yeah, and I think me being me, I probably wrote down more on my form, more aspirations than realistically I was ever going to achieve in a year. There is perhaps a sense in which the Spirit allows some of those to bubble up into action, but some of them may have been dropped by the wayside. So for me, actually, there's a training course that I'm about to go on, which I think was provoked by our discussion last year. And there's also a book which I was recommended to read 4 years ago by someone I really respect. And I asked them, which one book would you tell me to read? They tell me that such and such a book. I bought it. sat on my shelves for 3 years. But there's something about the accountability of a CMD audit, which has made me think, I said last November, I would read this book. I would actually get around to reading it. And somebody's going to check up on that. And so there is a little bit of usefulness in that accountability, because I finished it last week. So there we go. But, Ruth, Margaret, anything there?
I think it's just that sense of spurring each other on, isn't it? So one of my goals was about, which is particularly related to my PhD, which is about a weekly writing target. And so I phoned somebody to say, how many words have I written this week? And it means that you write more. And so in a similar way, when Margaret and I meet each other, we can say, oh, how's that going? And when we had the 6-month review, how are those 3 things that you said you were going to do, how's that going? And it just pushes it to the top of your mind again. And it's just more likely to happen if someone asks you, checks, how's that going? If that's in a good and friendly relationship where you care about each other and you want each other to flourish, then that's not harsh. That's just encouragement. And that's, I think, what Christians should be doing, and especially what Christian ministers should be doing.
Yes, I agree that stating something out loud makes it real in a different way to writing it down, and also perhaps makes it memorable to your partner. So whoever you're talking with, I might ask Ruth how something's going, which she had said to me in the meeting, and she might have forgotten about that. But Ruth has done that for me, has reminded me of things I've said. So you get to hear yourself speak in a different way. And it's really great when someone asks you how things are going.
And I wonder if there's a balance here. I mean, again, I think maybe all 4 of us here are, fairly organised in that if you're given a form, you will fill it in and you will write things down. Others of us, I think, don't work like that, and we would prefer just to have the conversation, which is of course the important part of it. But I guess I'd also want to say, if you're not in the habit of writing things down and committing to them, in this, try it, because there is that accountability that can prompt us to further action. All too often, a conversation can just be lost in its effectiveness, I think. Well, let's just pause a moment and just answer a few questions that are coming in on the chat. So, one that from Ruth, although Sarah's almost answered this in the chat, but I haven't found a peer yet. Does it matter if they have been in ministry less time than me, or are not the same gender? In both cases, I would say no, it doesn't matter at all. So pick someone who will be effective in the role that you're asking them to do, and it doesn't matter at all if they're younger than you. I guess it's all about whether, again, you trust them to be someone who will affirm you but challenge you at the same time. And no, this is do they need to be the same gender? I don't see why that would have to be the case, though all of us have our own rules and guidelines on how we work pastorally, of course, and in other ways with people of other gender. But I would apply your normal rules to this, I would say, on that. A couple of questions that have come in, I think we've sort of answered them. I just want to just make it clear again, though. How do people find all this fits with any ongoing regular supervision or peer mentoring? So if you're doing peer mentoring, then which really Trevor and I were doing and still do, then I would suggest that would be a great natural relationship out of which you could do a CMD audit. Doesn't mean to say you have to speak to your peer mentor and ask them to be your CMD peer, but it may well be good to do so. Again, so regular supervision, I think pastoral supervision does sometimes have stricter rules, and a part of pastoral supervision is to look at what is formative, so it looks at your development alongside what is normative and restorative. So it's likely that what you discuss in an audit will also come up in pastoral supervision, but whether your pastoral supervisor actually wants to sit down with you and go through a form and ask you these particular questions, that may not quite fit their remit. So I'd have a conversation with them and see whether they're happy to do so. And very similar, Gilson is asking, can your spiritual supervisor be your peer? Gilson, if you're talking about spiritual director, I would suggest no, because the spiritual director is really only concerned with your habit of attentiveness and your awareness of God and how you're encountering God and your inner life, and will be less concerned with the other 4 habits. So a spiritual director probably wouldn't make a good CMD peer. A pastoral supervisor might in certain circumstances. I'm going to have to now just read these next questions. So as I'm doing that, let me ask Margaret, Ruth and Trevor another one. I mean, is there anything, if you were now doing a CMD audit again, and Trevor and I have got ours booked in for next month, for November, isn't it? Would you do something differently, or is there a top tip that you would give as people kind of approach their own first audit, probably in the next month or so?
I mean, I think one of my main thoughts would be, first of all, prepare well. I mean, that really helps, and maybe don't be complacent. Or I mean, if we could probably all give quick reflexive answers, can't we, to the how am I doing? But our initial response is, we just need to dig a little bit deeper into ourselves and really examine that. And I mean, I wonder if, for us, as we come to doing this again, it would be easy perhaps to pick it up and think, well, we've already got a list of issues to work with, and we're just going to carry on that on a rolling process. I almost wonder if not quite beginning again will be necessary, but again, it needs. I think it will need careful preparation. What really has been going on, but besides all of this, and because we all change, don't we? And particularly, I guess, my goodness, after another year of mostly lockdowns or challenges, it will have changed each of us significantly. And maybe that's going to be part of the conversation. How have I been changed by this? Yeah, so perhaps there's a danger for us as we approach our second audit that we simply pick up last year's and go through it as a tick list. Have we done this? Have we done that? Yeah. Maybe a fresher, a blank sheet of paper to start with might be a better approach. Margaret?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'd do anything differently. It's been such an unpredictable time. I found that some of the things that I planned or hoped to do clearly haven't happened. And that's okay, because it's been COVID time, hasn't it? Yeah. So I'm not worried about that. But again, Ruth and I are working towards the 360 thing as well. And we need to see how that pans out. So it's just still a journey of finding out how all these things work. And I give it more time before worrying about changing our approach, perhaps, and just see what the benefits are all the way through. There have been some benefits. Even the unpredictability, and that's a win, really.
And Ruth?
I think before coronavirus, I would have said, we'd have to meet up in person. We'd have lunch, and it would be a lovely day out, which of course it would be. But I think actually to fit it into normal life, to have it as a regular practice of ministry, I think it works better on Zoom for us. So we're both in London, but Margaret's in South London and I'm in North London, and it's a long way in between. So for us, it just works really well. We can fit it easily into a regular pattern. We're going to stick with Zoom, and we're happy with that.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, maybe the borders of Zoom makes it easier to focus on the task, perhaps. Because I think my top tip would almost be the opposite. Because I think I would want to say, as you approach your audit, enjoy it. Here's an opportunity to meet with for a couple of hours somebody. Hopefully you get on with them, and they're supportive of what you're doing, and enjoy that time of exploration together. And even if you're admitting all the ways in which you are not practicing the CMD habits and wondering what to do about that, then just enjoy that fact that you are held by someone else respectfully and in love, and they're supporting you and wanting the best for you. And I think it should be an experience which is enjoyable, as well as an annual discipline to do. Well, I just want to make a final invitation for questions to come in. We won't prolong this necessarily if we don't need to, but if there are other questions coming, let me just have a quick look. I think most of them are now comments on what we've already said. Yeah, thank you, Brian. Brian's just suggesting there that, I'll bring this one back up on the screen perhaps. It seems to me that a peer from a different generation could be quite an asset. I think that's probably the case. And Neil, thank you, Neil, for this. Do you think there is a slightly different relationship if you are not both sharing this journey as a CMD peer together? Yeah, that's a great question. So the examples we've given, Trevor and myself, Ruth and Margaret, have both been mutual peers. Yes, there will be a different relationship, I guess, if one person is helping the other, but it's not mutual, which may well happen. So, for example, actually, worth saying, if you're a newly accredited minister, then like any other minister, you're free to choose who your CMD peer is. But it might be that you want to choose your mentor or ask your mentor who you have for those 3 years to be your CMD peer as well. It'll be up to them whether they say yes, of course, because it might require an additional meeting and so on and so forth. But in that case, it wouldn't be mutual, that there'd be one person giving to the other. So yes, it will change it. I'm not sure I've got any immediate response as to how it changes it. I think I'd still say, again, this is about someone you trust to provoke you, but to support you in what you're doing. Margaret, you mentioned about supervision with your church, but is that an equivalent here, or is that something rather different? Because in that case, it's obviously not mutual. Yeah,
it's an annual appraisal. Well, it started out as an appraisal. We've managed to knock it down to review. I prefer that language. But yeah, it's an annual process looking at different aspects of the ministry. And it is good because it does look at training. It looks at connectivity. It looks at accountability. You know, it's being put together by people who understand these things. So it's got some really good areas in it, and a certain amount of the information is transferable. But the overall purpose and the overall content is not the same.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe we'll make this the last one. Just a question again from Brian. Can we have a register of people looking for peers where we can sign up and look for people nearby who are also looking? Now, there's something I haven't thought of, and my response, I think, would be that would have to be done through the associations if you wanted to do that. So if you think that's something that would work for you locally, then you might want to have a chat with your regional minister to see whether that's something that could work for you in your association. So I'm going to pass that one on to them and maybe you have a conversation with them. Well, thank you so much for those who are watching and for the questions and your participation. And massive thank you for Margaret and Ruth and Trevor just being a bit vulnerable and to putting your own practice and your own development out there a little bit for examination. I really appreciate you coming along to help. I think it'd be good just to finish by praying for us as a collective body of Baptist ministers. So let's just do that for a moment. Let me lead us in prayer. Father God, I just give you thanks so much for all my brothers and sisters in Baptist ministry. And I want to thank you that discipleship is not something that ends at any one point. It is ongoing. Thank you that our development and our growth is your concern, your Spirit's concern for us in an ongoing way. And I would pray that this tool, the CMD audit, as with any other aspect of our CMD, would simply go to strengthen our resilience and strengthen our capability and strengthen our well-being. And I just pray for everyone in this difficult season when things have been so turbulent and where the return to normal appears to be perhaps not a normal that we know at all anyway. In this period particularly, give us grace with one another, and may we affirm each other and encourage one another in ways that are really helpful and really strengthening for each one of us. So Lord, bless all those who are watching this live or as a recording, and may we be inspired to continue to grow into all that you have us do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
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 So thank you to, I'm just going to remove you from the screen, but thank you to Ruth and to Margaret and to Trevor. Before we go, I just want to say we've got one more CMD webinar planned. That's on the 20th of October. And I've got people from our colleges, Simon Jones and Rosa Hunt and Glenn Marshall and Anthony Clark. They're coming to talk about how our colleges can support our CMD, which isn't necessarily just through formal qualifications. There are other ways as well that they can possibly help. So we're going to be exploring that together on the 20th of October. But otherwise, I think it's just for me to say God bless you and goodbye.